So welcome everybody. My name is Shannon Bryan and I'm a librarian at the Belleville Public Library. And thank you very much for joining us with this partnership with the Hastings County Historical Society. We have a great speaker today, Evan Morton. And just before I pass this along to Richard Hughes, I just want to mention the chat feature, which is on my screen. It's on the lower part in the middle. So that's how we're going to do any questions that you might have. So I will be monitoring the chat feature while Evan is doing his talk. And then when he's done talking, I will go through the questions with him. So if you've got anything, any comments or any questions, you can use the chat feature there and send a message to us, and we will make sure that those get answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical issues as well, you can also message me through the chat feature. And now I'm going to pass this along to Richard. Thank you very much, Richard.
Okay, yes, thank you, Shannon, and welcome everyone to today's public presentation. This is our third presentation by Zoom. We do look forward to getting back to our public presentations at Maranatha, which of course are live and actually are rather enjoyable social events as much as presentations. But until then, this is our third presentation, as I mentioned. We've learned about the Dutch immigration after the Second World War. Then we learned about the villages of the St. Lawrence that were flooded by the seaway. So it's really been quite interesting. So on behalf of the Hastings County Historical Society, welcome, and we will be continuing this series. We'll have another one at the end of June, which we're planning now and putting together. So bear with us, and we hope you'll find these enjoyable. The ones that were on previously are available on YouTube, Hastings County Historical Society YouTube, and so you can take them in at your leisure. So with that, I'll ask my colleague Jim Kennelly, who is the Programs Director for the Historical Society, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Richard. Evan Morton was born and raised in Tweed. He graduated from Tweed Consolidated School and Tweed High School. Then he went to Queen's and he taught for several years. He did some postgraduate work at the University of Toronto at his Bachelor of Library Science. Pardon? And later, he got his master's in library science. He established a library at Lakefield District Secondary School. For several years, he traveled around the world and he got a real education in things that I know nothing about. One of the things that he did is he served on the village of Tweed as a councillor and then as a deputy reed. He was the founding member, I should say, of the Tweed and Area Historical Society and developed the Tweed and Area Heritage Center. And if you've never been to it, you should take a look at it. It is chock full of material of interest to the historian, the genealogist, or just somebody who wants to learn about Tweed. For over 30 years, he's written the Heritage Herald column in the Tweed News and shared the joy of always learning about the Tweed area. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Evan Morton. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim. 20 years ago, had Jim asked me to do a presentation on the Hungerford Smallpox Epidemic of 1884, the response would have been, "Pardon? What was that?" Yes, although I was born in Tweed and grew up there, never in the community, nor in 8 years at Tweed Consolidated School, nor in 5 years at Tweed High School, had I ever heard of this. It was only about 15 years ago when repeated requests for information on the graves of relatives by people working on their family histories that we began to wonder, why wasn't that person buried in St. Edmund's Roman Catholic Cemetery, Sugar Island, Stokoe, or Mount Zion Methodist Cemetery at Park Settlement, or Bethel Cemetery at Chapman? And then we started to ask, well, when did they die? 1884, November, December, 1885, January. We then went to the death certificates of the township of Hungerford, and there was the answer. Smallpox, smallpox, smallpox. Certificate after certificate after certificate. Then we discovered in the Ontario Sessional Papers of 1885, special report on the Hungerford outbreak. As we studied this report, it became increasingly difficult to imagine the fear, despair, and panic that gripped the residents of the area. Their story must be told and permanently honored in our community. Our initial approach to the Ontario Heritage Trust for a provincial plaque received a formal, rather wary response with the suggestion that perhaps a local marker would be more suitable. However, we pursued our application with the requisite documentation in early 2007. Shortly after we had submitted this material, we received an enthusiastic communication from the Ontario Heritage Trust that the Hungerford smallpox epidemic of 1884 did indeed warrant a provincial plaque. Finally, 2009, October 22nd, 125 years after the outbreak of the epidemic, we proudly installed and dedicated on the grounds of the Tweed Area Heritage Centre an Ontario Heritage plaque, a fitting and enduring memorial to the sufferings of that event. 1884 had been such a good year in Tweed. Firstly, after 3 years of survey and construction, the Ontario and Quebec Railway was completed. And on May 14th, the first freight train passed through from Montreal to Owen Sound. The opening of that line through Tweed spurred William White, a local hardware merchant and tinsmith, to erect the first brick commercial block on the main street. And this was the beginning of a 20-year boom in brick buildings on the main street of Tweed. Also, the demand for housing was there, and many of the beautiful homes on Metcalfe Street in Colburn were from that boom period as well. But it started in 1884 with the opening of the first railway. Then in 1884, there was great rejoicing in the Methodist community. In 1874, the Wesleyan Methodists and the New Connection Methodists had united to form the Methodist Church in Canada. And now, 10 years later, they were joining with the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Primitive Methodist Church, and the Bible Christian Church to form one denomination. For the village of Tweed, that meant that the Bible Christian Church, which had been the first, built in 1852, and the Wesleyan Methodist Church in 1857, a frame church, followed by a stone church in 1869, and the Methodist Episcopal Church, a brick church erected in 1877, were finally together. The third group that was really very much thrilled in 1884, at least at the beginning, were the folk of St. Edmund's Roman Catholic Parish. St. Edmund's had been the mother church of the area, serving not only Hungerford, but also Madoc and Marmot and North Hastings. In 1879, rather quietly and quickly, Father Davis had moved to Madoc. It was more central for his work, of course, but it did not sit well with some of the St. Edmund's parish folk that the mother church was now a mere mission of Madoc. But in 1884, St. Edmund's was reestablished as a separate parish with a newly appointed priest, Father Fleming. One of Father Fleming's first acts of Christian charity innocently brought incredible suffering to the area. Joseph Thompson, a 12-year-old lad from the Liverpool Industrial School run by the Christian Brothers, had arrived in Quebec with about 40 others on September the 7th. When he arrived in Kingston with his wee trunk of clothing and trinkets, he was sent to Tweed under the care of Father Fleming. About the middle of September, Father Fleming placed him in the home of one of his parishioners, Edward King, a farmer in the French settlement at the Clare River. 3 or so days later, young Joseph became very ill and was ill for over a week. On October 5th, Johnny King, the 5-year-old son of the Kings, became very ill. 2 weeks later, 2-year-old Tommy, and in another 2 weeks, the entire family. The father, Edward, the mother, Mary, and an older sister, Margaret Ann, were all suffering. Being a closely knit community, neighbors came to help this stricken family. Alexander Gonor, 45, was afflicted, but he had been vaccinated some 28 years before, so he had a mild reaction. Not so his 5 children, one of whom, 10-year-old Angeline, died. Since the disease had not been accurately identified, many believing it to be chickenpox or something else, neighbors helping neighbors spread the disease with increasingly tragic results. The James Palmer family had 11 members infected, with 4 dying. On November 11th, 13-year-old Margaret and 6-year-old Annie died. 2 days later, their 16-year-old brother, Henry, and on the 17th, 17-year-old Joseph. Can you imagine losing 4 of your children within a week? In the Georges Lavallée family, 7 suffered, with 13-year-old Philomena dying. One of the hardest hit families in that French settlement area was that of Exor-Casibo, with 14 afflicted, 6 dying, plus a baby during premature labor. They were young. Elizabeth, 27, Mary, 22, Louis, 3, Peter, 1, Paul, 3 months, Peter, 22. One can understand why this family was so afflicted. The Casibo home was a log shanty with only 2 rooms. You couldn't get away from it. Meanwhile, Jerry Larange, a 21-year-old itinerant farm laborer who had come to the Edward King farm to help with the threshing, and while there, he had had to share a bed with who else but 12-year-old Joseph Thompson, who was so sick. Jerry then went to other farms working, and he arrived at the Isaac Woodcock farm at Stoco on October the 22nd. Here he became violently ill and died November the 2nd, being buried 2 days later. Again, thoughtful neighbors in the Stokoe area came to help in the care and burial of Jerry, totally unaware of what the disease was. Of the 14 sickened members of Isaac Woodcock's family, 4 died. Not so fortunate was the family of Andrew Sinclair, a neighbor. Close your eyes and just try to think of a neighbor coming in to help that Sinclair family. I came to help, didn't know what I could do, but I had to do something. There were so many sick and so very sick. On Sunday, November the 9th, 2-year-old Richard and 43-year-old William died. The next day, on Monday, November the 10th, Andrew Jr., 27, died. What next? 2 days later, Mrs. Andrew Sinclair Jr., 21, died. And the next day, 2-year-old James. When would this hell ever end? Saturday, November 15th, Mary Jane Sinclair died. She was 56. And on Tuesday, November 18th, we lost 12-year-old Mary. Such agony. This poor family lost 7 members within 10 days. Can you imagine that? The family of neighbor Noble MacDonald lost 2 of 7. Another neighbor, the Nathan Rogers family, lost 2 children. And they were young, William 17 and Annie 13. The Samuel Durkin family lost both parents and a young lad, leaving 4 wee children orphans. It spread because people didn't know what it was, and they tried to carry on a normal life, helping their neighbors as they could, going to the store, going to church. But it all added to the tragedy. Reeve Patrick Murphy, the storekeeper at Stokoe, alarmed by the growing reports of illness and death, requested that Dr. Timotheus Ebenezer Pomeroy of Tweed investigate the situation. Hence, it was not until November 11th that it was recognized as a smallpox epidemic. Immediately, Reeve Murphy demanded that people be buried on their own properties, unless they were immediately adjacent to a cemetery. And that's why so many families don't know where their loved ones were buried. On November 17th, Father Fleming was so distraught over the spreading of smallpox and death among his parishioners that he sent an urgent letter to the Mother Superior of the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul, Kingston, pleading for sisters to come and nurse at the hospital in Stokoe, the new home of Aunts and Caniff, which had been offered to serve the sick unable to be attended at home. The council convened and passed a resolution to help. When the community had been assembled, the superior explained to the sisters the very dangerous situation at Stokoe, and then requested that each sister state in writing her willingness or unwillingness to go to nurse the afflicted, and to submit to the Mother Superior her response after Mass the next morning. After Mass the next morning, the Mother Superior opened the letters. Every sister expressed her willingness. So it was decided to send Sister Mary Leonard and Sister Mary Leo, leaving at once on November the 18th for Stokoe. On November 17th, Dr. Defoe of Madoc had reported to the Office of the Provincial Board of Health that a smallpox epidemic had broken out in Hungerford. On November 18th, Reeve Patrick Murphy telegraphed to Dr. Peter Bryce, the Secretary of the Provincial Board of Health, requesting that he come immediately to Hungerford as a smallpox epidemic raged out of control. November 19th, Dr. Bryce came on the Ontario and Quebec Railway to Tweed, meeting 3 members of the council and Dr. Pomeroy, the medical health officer. Excuse me. He had the council constitute a local board of health, plus a number of sanitary inspectors acting under the board. A proclamation was drafted and 200 copies were posted throughout the township. And this was the proclamation of 1884, November 20th. 1. Whenever any householder knows that a person within his family or household has smallpox, he must report the same to the local board of health or the medical officer of health within 24 hours. 2. No householder shall permit any person or clothing or thing exposed to smallpox to be removed from the house without the consent of the Board of Health or the medical officer of health. 3. No person shall have access to any person affected with smallpox or shall expose themselves in public, if exposed to it, except clergymen, physicians, nurses, or members of the board. 4. Persons recovering from smallpox or who have been in attendance on it shall not leave the premises without a certificate from the attending physician or the medical officer of health. 5. Any member of the local board of health may call to his assistance any constable or any other fit person, and it shall be the duty of every such person to render assistance. 6. No person shall be allowed to take the train at Calidar, Sheffield, Tweed, or Ivanhoe without a certificate from the medical officer of health or some qualified physician. Lastly, 7, any person violating any of the above shall be liable to a fine of $50 and costs or imprisonment at the discretion of the court. The proclamation then listed the 4 members of the local board of health, the sanitary inspectors at Stokoe, Thomasburg, Bogart, and Marlbank, plus 12 special constables. Dr. Bryce then returned to Toronto. Every day, as people heard of more infections and more deaths, anxiety turned to terror and panic throughout the township. Tweed merchants refused entry to their stores to anyone from the Stokoe area. All the hotels in Tweed burned sulfur. Shops and homes were fumigated. When Tweedites heard that a man from Tweed had gone to Stokoe and returned, they ordered him out of the village, presumably only for a period of isolation. A man from Aaronsville area took a pair of chickens to Tamworth and sold them to a grocer. When the grocer discovered from where they had come, he dug a deep hole, buried the chickens, and then fumigated his premises. There developed outside the immediate area a hysterical boycott of people and products from Tweed. Residents of Belleville became so alarmed that they pressured for the suspension of the stage from Bridgewater, present day at Tinalite, through Tweed to Belleville. Only the mail was allowed to continue. No passengers. The Tweed post office refused to handle mail from the Stokoe area. An American book published a few years ago, Smallpox, A History, stated, quote, "So great was the fright in Tweed that townsmen built fences around their houses and closed their doors against neighbors for fear that the scourge would be carried into their families. Those suffering from smallpox were neglected and left to die without assistance." We don't know the source of that quote, and we question its veracity. There was but one case nearby, Father Fleming, whose residence was in Georgetown, a wee settlement adjacent to Tweed. But he was isolated in his house and tended by two more sisters from Kingston, Sister Mary of the Cross and Sister Ryan. However, Tweed residents were very concerned that Dr. Pomeroy returned each night to his home in Tweed, with the result that an extensively signed petition to replace him was sent to the Provincial Board of Health. When Dr. Bryce received this petition and heard of what was going on in the area, he returned to Tweed November 29th, traveling firstly to Bridgewater, where he met with Dr. Law, the medical officer of health for Elsevier, the township immediately north of Hungerford, coming back to Tweed to meet with the Board of Health and pressure support for Dr. Pomeroy, then held a public meeting in the township hall to try to calm the anxiety and panic of the citizens. Then he continued to Roslyn, where at midnight he had a meeting with Dr. Hudson, garnering his support in preventing the Hungerford residents seeking to escape to Belleville. The following day, November 30th, with Dr. Pomeroy, Dr. Bryce visited the infected districts. Firstly, the Clare River, where it began, then Stokoe, where he inspected the hospital with its 20 patients, and finally Marlbank, where he experienced firsthand the extent of their fear and panic. The hotel keeper refused to answer the door. A local merchant refused to let him in his house when he learned that Dr. Bryce had come from Stokoe. An inspector spoke to him outside his home, informing him that 6 families in that area were afflicted, with none obtaining medical assistance. Eager to ensure that Hungerford residents were not trying to reach Tamworth or Napanee, he continued on the Tamworth Road into Sheffield Township, the township immediately to the east of Hungerford. From the sentry on the road, he learned that the Sheffield Medical Officer of Health was inoculating people and that all roads out of Hungerford were being guarded. Returning to Stokoe, he promised Reeve Patrick Murphy to send additional help, then took the 3 a.m. train from Tweed to Toronto. With 2 medical students, he returned, leaving one at Stokoe and taking the other to Marlbank, which now had 40 cases. Back, he went to Toronto to secure 3 men for the sanitary corps, plus a nurse to assist the sisters at the Stokoe Hospital. From the first steps of containing the spread of the disease by strict patrols on all roads out of Hungerford, the closure of all schools and churches, and the banning of public meetings, the doctors then began house-to-house vaccinations, despite some initial resistance, and the sanitary corps removed families from their homes to a safe spot while they disinfected and fumigated the homes. People returned to their cleansed houses with fresh clothing from charities in Belleville and Toronto. The Charles Woodcock family at Black Creek, just to the northeast of Tweed, became infected with Mrs. Woodcock dying. She was buried immediately on the property, and the rest of the family relocated to the Isaac Woodcock home at Stokoe. Because this was the closest case to the village of Tweed, the officials deemed it prudent to burn the house and all contents. Later, Charles Woodcock received a payment of $10 for another stove and $30 for the loss of the house and contents. The cases in Elsevier, Flinton, and Sheffield were contained by early, strictly enforced isolation. The rapid spread of the disease was illustrated in the Marlbank area. Ed King of the Clare River sent his daughter Maggie to his wife's parents, Felix and Margaret Quinn, hoping that she would escape further contamination. 2 days later, she took ill. When she had recovered from her mild attack, her grandmother sent her to school at SS number 12. The teacher, Miss Way, took ill, as did 2 students. Miss Way, boarding at the Dan Byrne family, spread it to all that family. Families that had gone to help the Quinns included Duchesne, Donahue, Murphy, and White, all of whom became infected. Joe Casabo from the Clare River had come as a servant to the William Riley home, innocently infecting that family. Thomas Coe's son, Edward, caught it from sitting beside John Flynn Jr. in church. The Roman Catholic people of the Marlbank area belonged to the parish of Church of the Assumption in Erinsville, hence the spread into Sheffield. The Thomas Flynn household had contracted the disease from the Thomas Dolan family, who had come to help thresh at the Flynn farm, unaware that they were suffering from smallpox in their own home. How innocently it all happened, and how quickly. While figures vary, if one considers not just Hungerford Township, but the larger area of infection, one finds that about 250 people were afflicted, with about 70 deaths. Out of this tragedy, there came much good. One, to prevent such future outbreaks, every municipality must have a medical health officer with designated power and authority. Two, the efficacy of vaccination was proven in Hungerford, leading to the recommendation for statutory provision making proof of successful vaccination a condition of entrance to our public schools. The aggressive and unprecedented actions in Hungerford prepared the Provincial Board of Health to cope the next year in 1885 with a threat to Eastern Ontario from the smallpox epidemic which raged in Montreal, claiming over 3,000 lives. For it contributed to Ontario's Uniform Health Code, the central supervision and audit, state intervention, and uniform services. 5, the swift intervention earned the provincial board a high reputation in international circles, laying the basis for international cooperation on disease reporting. 6, informal ties developed during the course of fighting the smallpox epidemic led in 1886 to the establishment of the Association of Executive Health Officers. 7, the experience of the Hungerford smallpox epidemic of 1884 highlighted the necessity for better vaccines, for a more secure supply of vaccines, for mass vaccination, and for public isolation facilities, all of which helped in later epidemics. And it was interesting to note that the Nickel Wing of Kingston General Hospital was one of the earliest isolation facilities in Canada, serving from 1891 to 1922. The next time that you are in Tweed, do take a few moments to read the Ontario Heritage Plaque on the grounds of the Tweed and Area Heritage Centre, 40 Victoria Street North. And as you read the plaque, do remember that this was not merely an historical event, but more importantly, it was a tragic suffering of so many people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evan. We do have one question I did see come up. Just give me 1 second. Ken is asking, Evan, could you be more specific about the location of the initial King outbreak and also the Stokoe Hospital, please?
The concession and lot numbers? I can get you that information. I don't have it right now, but definitely, yes. If there is some way that I can get your email, I will look it up and send it to you.
How about, is it all right if I share your email with the attendees and then they can email you directly if they?
Of course, yes.
And I have it here somewhere.
Tweed Heritage Info, all one word, lowercase, TWEED HERITAGEINFO, Tweed Heritage Info at gmail.com.
Okay, perfect. I have shared that. Okay, is there any other questions from our attendees? I'll wait a minute just to give you a chance to type them up. Thank you very much. That was very informative and a very timely talk, given what we are going through right now.
I found it interesting that in the proclamation, it stated that if anyone from the Board of Health mentioned to a person that their assistance was needed, it was their duty. There was no question of rights. It was their duty to do it. That doesn't sit well in today's society, unfortunately.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. All right, I think I will pass this along to Richard. Thank you, Evan.
Yes, indeed. Evan and I are sharing the same chair. That was a very well prepared presentation. I'm sure everyone will agree with that. A great deal of detail, and you can almost sense the feeling through those small farming communities, very tight knit farming communities, and the fear would be just overpowering. It's true that it's on the trains and on the roads there were armed guards making sure people didn't enter and leave the area, which was also the case in Belleville in 1832, where for a cholera epidemic, when there were armed guards at the entrance to the town of Belleville at that time. So Evan, thank you very much on behalf of all of the people participating today and the Historical Society. It seems each of these presentations we learned so much, and they're very well presented and very clear. And so we thank you very, very much. And for you watching, please, at the end of June, we have another one coming, another presentation when the publicity for that will be put out. So we hope to see you again. Thank you for joining us today on this beautiful day. And now 3:43 in the afternoon, you still got time to get out and get some beautiful fresh air. Thank you very much and goodbye.